Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera. Saya Syafzan Johari dan malam ini agenda Awani bersiaran dan kita akan berbincang mengenai cabaran dan isu Islam abad ke-21, terutama sekali kalau kita mendepani cabaran-cabaran semasa, cabaran keganasan oleh puak-puak pelampau terutamanya di sekitar Asia Barat. Dan ini bukan satu cabaran untuk negara kita sahaja, kerana negara kita juga mengalami di mana ada beberapa segelintir pihak yang cuba menyertai mereka dan dikuatiri akan berkesan pada keselamatan negara. Tapi ini merupakan satu bentuk fenomena yang global, kerana di Australia contohnya pada bulan Disember di mana seorang yang mendakwa sebagai seorang ketua agama ataupun imam bertindak untuk mengadakan siege atau kempungan di Cafe Lin. Ini di Australia, juga berlaku di beberapa tempat lain di seluruh dunia dan semuanya ada kaitan dengan kumpulan pelampau. Dan bagi memahami keadaan ini dan bagaimana komuniti antarabangsa, khususnya pihak pergerakan sivil atau NGO mampu untuk memulihkan semula persepsi terhadap Islam di peringkat antarabangsa. Kita bersama Imam Afroz Ali, pengarah urusan Seekers Hub Global Australia. Assalamualaikum Imam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
It's good to have you again.
Thank you so much for actually bringing me back on here and talk to you. It's always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. And you were there in Sydney when the Sydney Lin Cafe siege. You were there.
Yes, that's right. Yes, I had the unfortunate privilege to be very directly involved in consultation and liaison with the media, as well as with some authorities as this entire thing unfolded. In fact, I spent the entire night within 200 meters of the actual event to actually be stationed within the city area to be able to actually assist as much as possible in making sure that this matter was not going to be bulldozed to be seen as if this was an Islamic terrorism, but in fact we actually had an individual criminal who did what he did.
And your Prime Minister, Mr. Prime Minister Tony Abbott, yesterday said that the risk of terrorism still exists in the Down Under in Australia. So people are afraid. They're not just afraid of, the majority of the citizens of Australia are not Muslims.
That's right.
And they are afraid. They are not just afraid of Islam, they are also afraid of Muslims.
Without a doubt.
How are you managing this?
I think the first thing to mention is that Mr. Abbott's statement is very divisive based on uninformed and irresponsible basis, because by far and large Australians are actually well aware that Islam and indeed Muslims are actually safe and good people. This has been proven when the Sydney siege happened, for example, that the top 10 Twitter handle came out to be "I'll ride with you" and Team Humanity. That was the support shown by Australians that what is happening over here is not something to do with Islam or Muslims, but these are to be treated as individuals who are involved in criminal activity. So our Prime Minister is very uninformed in making some of these claims. But having said all of that, the reality of radicalization and the reality of possible terrorism exists anywhere in the world, not only in Australia in some exclusive bubble, that in fact this is a problem that in fact exists around the world. There are legitimate grievances that people around the world are holding against governments like Mr. Abbott's government, where they are actually doing things which are very much against the interest of the nation. And then you have people from all over the world who are upset with this, and you have a group of people who are obviously going to be radicalized and act in an extremist way. And this reality of extremism without a doubt exists within Australia, and we have a concern that we must make sure that Australia remains a very safe space, that it has continued to be so.
And then, as you said, this is a global thing. It's not just exclusive for Australia.
Without a doubt.
And Seekers Hub is a global NGO.
Yes.
You're not just in Australia and in
right.
Malaysia, but you're in Europe as well.
Yes.
And is the challenges similar in correcting people's perception towards Muslims?
The effort to the struggle to correct people's perceptions is without a doubt universal. We have three individual forces, when combined together, are extremely harmful and highly misleading to the citizens of the world. The first one is without a doubt the politics of war that in fact is going on there, in which governments are involved in the pillaging of and destruction of various foreign lands. Out of this arises a whole amount of extremism, which happen to be dominantly, in fact, Muslims. But we must understand that actually, when you look at the number of extremist and terrorist attacks that in fact has occurred in the last 10 years, Muslim terrorists only contribute to 2% of that. So there's a misconception about that. The second unfortunate power is the media themselves, where there is a serious level of misconception that when you look at the covering of Charlie Hebdo, as opposed to the Chapel Hill killing, for example, as to how this was reported and how this was in fact manipulated by the media and the forces that in fact are siding with that, is extremely problematic. The third problem is that in fact the correcting of the perceptions of the masses at large has a responsibility also square upon Muslims as well, because we have Muslims who are irresponsibly and ignorantly representing Islam, in fact misrepresenting Islam, because they are suggesting that somehow this jihadist attitude, this military attitude of Islam is somehow the norm and the only way that in fact Islam looks at how to resolve with the conflicts and the problems around the world.
Well, for Malaysians and what the government of Malaysia acknowledged, that this action is not an action of jihad. This is not jihad.
Without a
at all.
doubt, yeah.
And
It is
agreed
agreed unanimously by scholars around the world, in fact.
But it is not. I assume the non-Muslims, especially from the non-Muslim majority countries,
Yes.
like Europe, for instance, would never understand this.
That's true, because the battle to get the normative and authentic understanding of Islam into the masses is so difficult. If we are speaking to 20, 100, 1,000 people, there are thousands of people out there who are misled and also misleading. You simply have to follow Twitter to see how many anti-Islamists are actually posting false information about Islam. And I'm talking about not dozens, I'm talking about in the hundreds, if not in the thousands. And so there is a force which is trying to discredit religion, not only Islam, but religion as a whole, because ultimately religion answers the questions of ethics. And those people who want to, in fact, make this world into an unethical world have a vested interest to make sure that that religions are, in fact, discredited. So you are talking about a serious force over here which is trying to mislead people. Add to that misinformation from jihadist Muslims who are actually doing exactly what these people are suggesting that Islam's all about. Islam, without a doubt, is going to get a bad name. But that is not the reality, because most Muslims, and indeed the normative, authentic Islam, completely contradicts and rejects this kind of ideas.
So how to bring the real message, how to correct these minds, and you've been preaching throughout your life,
Yes.
and I know you have a lot of experience to share on the challenges to get to them,
Yes.
to build the bridge between the Muslims and the non-Muslim
Yes.
in the non-majority Muslim countries. We have to take a short break for a while. Come back later. Yeah? Bagi Pastor. Ketemu lagi dalam agenda Awani. Now, Imam Mafruz Ali, you've been preaching throughout your life, and you're not just preaching in Australia, but you've also been preaching in other parts of the world through Seekers Hub Global.
Yes.
What is the challenge to bridge the gap, to make them understand that this is not Islamic?
The greatest challenge is to, in fact, build a critical mass of people around the world who understand the truth about Islam. Right now, the scales are well against us, that in fact a lot of people don't know what Islam is all about, and therefore any assertion about Islam would be a consideration for them to take into account. And the loudest voice right now is that voice which in fact tries to discredit Islam. So I'm finding the greatest challenge is in fact to be able to get people to listen to at least the alternative, which would hopefully be the voice that they realize is actually the norm and the orthodoxy of Islam. And this is a big challenge.
But would they listen if they have such a hatred towards the Muslim community?
I have found that by far and large, people around the world, and indeed Australians, are good people, that they simply need to know the truth. And I would say, and this is the reason why I'm saying critical mass, I'm not suggesting every one of them.
Yes.
If we actually have a critical mass of people, and I believe that in fact this can actually be achieved, I think in Australia we have achieved that to a large extent, and this is the reason why the discrediting and the imbalancing of this interesting symbiotic relationship that actually exists within the diversity of Australia, that this is being attacked even through political means as well, because we do have a critical mass of people who believe that in fact this has nothing to do with Islam. The problem is the larger masses globally, in fact, in this regard. But that problem, which leads me to the second challenge, cannot be removed if we have a minority but well-funded entity that is going to, in fact, discredit Islam themselves by doing things which are simply unacceptable. So I'll give me a quick example. Let me give you a quick example about the kind of hypocrisy and that we see in this regard, but which is not available to the public to actually judge upon because it's just not made public. 76% of the Australians who are actually at the moment in Syria fighting for Daesh and claiming to be somehow holding the flags of Islam, in fact, are people who come from criminal backgrounds. And I'm not talking about petty crimes over here that people have fallen into unfortunate civil crimes. We are talking about people who have existent criminal proceedings against them in relation to murder, rape, prostitution rings. And you and I know very well this has nothing to do with Islam. And these are the people who are actually going out there somehow claiming to represent Islam. You have, I think, 30% of those who actually came out of Europe into Syria to fight alongside under the name of Daesh are people who actually purchased online books called Islam for Dummies. That you needed a crash course on Islam to actually fight for Islam. So we can see that, in fact, we actually have a well-funded evil message that in fact is being passed around, even if they are a minority. So this is another challenge we have, to be able to bring awareness to people that this is in fact not Muslims or Islam in terms of what they believe in, but these are people who are actually quite clearly misrepresenting Islam in many ways than one.
You've been speaking about this since after London siege. I saw it in YouTube.
That's correct.
And is there any specific action or program by Seekers Hub Global to basically to get in touch with this influential, distinctive masses?
We have two programs that we in fact have been running for many years, not only because it's a reaction to Daesh and ISIS, etc., but in fact we know that Muslims themselves actually have been ignorant of their Islam. So we have been very active in raising awareness to Muslims throughout the world, and certainly in Australia, for them to actually come to grips with what are the authentic positions that Islam actually hold on all these matters. So right now, for example, we're running a program called 10 Questions You Wanted to Ask About Islam. This deals in detail with authenticated references on what is jihad, what is rebellion, does Islam allow rebellion, what is citizenship, does Islam allow us to be able to vote in a democratic country, for example. So these things are which are actually challenged by countries, entities like Daesh, for example. So we're answering these questions. What does it mean when we actually go into jihad? Who can call a jihad, for example? We have run approximately 37 programs in the last 4 months in order to raise awareness within the Muslim community. The second thing that we have done is actually bump up our involvement in interreligious functions and forums in order for the Australians particularly, and certainly in New Zealand and inshallah in other parts of the world as well, for the people of other faiths to in fact engage with Muslims, to understand what Muslims and Islam orthodoxy at the orthodoxy level says, therefore they can be educated so they can educate their masses. So we are dealing with churches, we're dealing with institutions, for them to be able to understand what are the facts about these matters, so they can inshallah, hopefully they can actually spread that message across to their own people, in order for us to be able to generate inshallah ta'ala a critical mass of people who understand the realities of this matter, the truth of this matter, so that we can then deal with the aspects of terrorism and extremism as a collective community of citizens of this world, rather than pointing fingers that the governments are very easily doing right now, because it serves their purpose to actually continue in the politics of war they do. We want to be able to raise the grassroots people around the world to stand together and say, war from any side, whether state-sponsored or individual terrorist organization-sponsored, is simply unacceptable.
A few days ago, it was in Johor, the southern state of Malaysia. There's a girl by the age of 14.
Wow.
Wanted to leave Malaysia
Yes.
to join the extremist group. She's still 14.
14, yes.
And this is for me, it's bizarre. It's out of the world. How could a very young lady
Yes.
have this what I call urge to fly to the Middle
That's
East
right.
and do that? And but this opens up another room for discussion, or another some thinking has to be done on what actually attracts them. It's not just criminals, but
Yes.
14-year-old
Exactly.
young lady
Yes.
to join them. Can we talk about it later?
That's such an important point you're raising over here, and I'm so thankful that you are able to address these points, because it's so important.
We have to take a break for a while. Talk about it later, after this. I want to come back to this case where this 14-year-old young lady got attracted to the militant groups in the Syria and Libya and Iraq, and she wanted to. She had bought a ticket to fly to the Middle East. So, and she's just 14.
Yes, and she's not obviously coming from a criminal background.
Of course.
Yes.
So it opens up my mind. It's not just this group, this militant group. It's not just mad acting or attracting the criminals, but also the innocents.
Yes.
And I was reading, and I found out that she was studying in madrasa, a religious school, and I was like, oh, maybe it's because of the religious school. No, it's not.
No, exactly. It was an external forces that
Exactly.
exploiting her. Yes.
Is this alarming to you? Because it is.
It's very alarming to me, particularly when we're looking at two things. One is a female, very innocent, very naive, and secondly, a 14-year-old. That is shocking, alarming, and certainly a case for us to know that this is an emergency that we need to deal with. This is a triage situation for us to actually act upon, because Daesh's, ISIS's message is getting through to even 14-year-olds and maybe even younger. We have a 15 or 16-year-old boy from Australia who actually is in the forefront of videos of Syria during beheadings, etc., etc. So that's very alarming. Now, I see two reasons over here, if I can share those two quickly. First and foremost, you're quite right. The madrasas in Malaysia, and certainly Malaysian Malu as a community, are deservedly a very peace-loving people. This is an amazing country. It's a blessed country, without a doubt. So we have foreign influences who are exploiting the minds of our young. How are they doing that? Firstly, we have to recognize that our youth, and even as young as 14, have legitimate grievances and dissent from what the governments around the world are doing. We have to address this, and we have to accept this, that our youth are intelligent people, and they are asking the right questions. But you see, those right questions are not met with right answers. And so these exploiters, these jihadists who purely want military warfare for power, are able to fill that vacuum, that gap, by giving them reasons and justifications that sounds like it's coming from Islam. So a good Muslim, a naive Muslim, will go, you know what, that makes sense. We have governments killing Muslims left, right, and center around the world. It seems like that this might be making sense to them. So they go, well, we want to go and join in saving our brothers and our sisters, because these are the words used by the exploiters and recruiters to actually take people across over there. The second is that we have a number of individual Muslims who may or may not be practicing, but as young as 14, that they are, and this is another thing we need to address, that they are looking for adventure. That they're looking for a 14-year-old woman, living in a pretty subdued society or community where, as a woman, she might not be experiencing as much excitement in life as that she wants to, suddenly sees this thing in a very naive manner, going across to Syria to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whichever way she thinks this is the case, very wrongly so, and then ultimately thinks that this is a very good way to actually see what is so exciting out there. If I can quickly share an example, I think it was an Australian Somali lady who, after 3 months of having done the same thing, going across into Syria, then in fact escapes out of Syria because she had gone there to get married to some guy, and that guy claims to be a Muslim and all those kind of things, and there are Muslims if that's what they claim to be. So that's not our place to be making any judgments. But what she experienced was that these people were very violent people. She was sexually violated. She was raped, and she in fact was almost like a harem girl amongst the ISIS fighters who are supposedly holding the bearers of Islam. Then she escapes out of there and enters back into Turkey and then tells her story as far as this is concerned. In other words, these people, these recruiters, these ISIS recruiters, are telling lies to our people by justifying it through hadith and Quranic verses, that somehow these are things, in fact, which is going to take them to Jannah, etc. And we have naive people in our communities like anywhere else, and they're trying to either serve the community or, in fact, looking for adventure. And when they actually get to Syria, they realize actually, wow, this is not what we had actually anticipated at all. And they can be sexually violated, they can be involved in all sorts of actions that actually has nothing to do with Islam. And then they wake up, but it's too late. And thank God that in fact these authorities were able to actually get this 14-year-old, because I can pretty much guarantee that when she would have landed into Syria after having married her friend in Cairo, that when they got into Syria, they would have realized actually this is a very dark place, and she will most likely would have been used as a sex slave.
How to reverse this external influence?
This is a very difficult question. All I can say is that reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by doing the best we can. And this is what I'm doing. The best I can do is the best I can do. And that is to educate people, bring people to awareness of these matters. I have a paper called The Ignored Voices, Syria. And so allowing people to understand what the facts are, and the fact that actually you are covering this on television over here, this is an incredible social service that you're doing, to be able to bring to the households of our families that they understand that what they are hearing from the other side is actually not the truth. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may God Almighty bless the project, because it's very important that every one of us, every human citizen on earth has to do something to bring awareness to people that this has nothing to do with Islam, and we are actually talking about a highly corrupt and a grievously violent situation in the politics of war.
Well, Imam, this is so much we can do. We want to do more. We want to explain to the people that this is not, that what the atrocities in the Middle East, what you see in TV, in YouTube, or the beheading, it's not Islam. It's not Islamic at all. And each and every day, we are trying to expose the truth behind who they really are. And it's very enlightening today to see you, to get you to talk about it. Thank you very much, Imam Afruz Ali,
You're most welcome.
pengarah urusan Seekers Hub Global Australia, cakap mengenai cabaran dan isu Islam abad ke-21. Dan sekian saja agenda Awani malam ini. Sebelum cadangan, hantarkan ke platform-platform social media kami. Anda juga boleh menyaksikan kami secara langsung di astrawani.com. Terima kasih. Selamat malam. Thank you very much.